The Horse Race is brought to you by Benchmark Strategies, Boston's leading public affairs and public relations consulting firm. To learn more, connect with Benchmark on LinkedIn at Benchmark Strategies or visit benchmark-strategies.com.
Welcome back to The Horse Race, your weekly look at politics, policy, and elections in Massachusetts. I'm Jennifer Smith, reporter for Commonwealth Beacon, and it's Thursday, January 29th. Today we're talking about immigration and education. What can the state of Massachusetts do about ICE, and what do parents in Massachusetts want to do about AI? All right, we're back. Greetings. Steve Koczela, president of the MassINC polling group. Is it safe at this moment to admit that neither of us is dealing with the snowstorm happening in New England?
How much shoveling have you done, Jen? I need to ask you that. How much shoveling have you done in the last 3 days?
I have not had to. The weather in Park City, Utah has been doing it for me. We see grass. There's grass. There's no snow. I am in a ski town and there's no snow. And I keep getting texts from people in Boston saying, I beg you, take any of it. Take the snow. You would love it. And I'm like, that would be great. Can we have a snow exchange program?
Yeah, they're actually expecting more this weekend. So it is 80 plus degrees every day here in the great city of Nairobi. So I think we just lost like half of our listeners probably with that little exchange. But anyway, our thoughts and prayers are with you. Great state of Massachusetts and MBTA to you too.
Oh, truly. And I think that takes us to one of our horse race classic hard pivots, which is talking about, the joy of winter to absolute political chaos, confusion, all of that. Steve, why are we here? What are we talking about? And can we actually just stick to the snow?
We cannot, unfortunately, Jen. We have many important things to discuss. We have a new poll that we released just last week on AI and education in the classroom, how parents are reacting to it, and so forth. And you, Jen, just this week, have a very interesting article about ICE and what Massachusetts can actually do about it. So, should we get into it?
Let's go.
It seems recently like news about ICE is everywhere. We have news on ICE in Minneapolis. Earlier on, we were hearing about ICE in other cities, including in Boston, and everybody's kind of wondering where it goes from here. And as state leaders are wondering what happens next, they're also trying to prepare, trying to see what they can do, pass what they can pass, and so forth. So Jen, you had an explainer in Commonwealth this week about what the state can actually do. So let's get into it. First of all, the obvious question, why now? They've already been here. ICE has already been in Massachusetts to a certain extent. So why the focus on it now?
That is kind of the question of the day, but also I think one that would be pretty clear to anyone who's kind of been following the news lately. To your point, yes, ICE and other federal immigration authorities have kind of been surging all over the country for the past year, notably in LA, threats in Chicago. Massachusetts itself saw an ICE surge in September that ended with about 1,400 arrests. Quick side note there, by ICE's own count, less than half of those that were arrested during that last surge in September had serious criminal records. So the broader conversation about who is being targeted is still very, very up in the air. But we're talking about this now because the latest surge, Operation Metro Surge, that was targeting primarily the Twin Cities in Minnesota, has ended up with about 3,000 arrests and notably the deaths and fatal shootings of 2 U.S. citizens who were at these protesting ICE activities. So the first death, which was the shooting of Renee Good, made people very, very anxious. It amped up the protests. There was a lot more resistance and objection. But it was over this last weekend when immigration agents basically jumped on and then shot an ICU nurse, Alex Preddy, and the video recordings of what happened seem to contradict directly the administration's descriptions of what was happening. That really kind of kicked up efforts on the state into overdrive, both in the rhetoric and also in what Massachusetts is ready to propose again.
Okay, so then what can the state actually do? What levers do they have to pull if ICE were to show up here again? What policies should we have in place by then?
So this is one of those areas where the different branches, the different divisions of state government have very, very different options. Most of them are defensive. There are some that you might classify as offensive if we're talking about kind of strengthening different sorts of state policies and laws. But as Attorney General Andrea Campbell said when I was talking to her about this, the state is really on the back foot. The way she put it is the cards are stacked against us at a state level because both the Constitution and federal law give the federal government itself tremendous, tremendous power over immigration, both kind of setting up immigration policy and also enforcing it. So it's maybe the least helpful way to answer your question, but it's more notable sometimes to lean into what the state can't do and then try and figure out how they're trying to work around those limitations. So first and foremost, the state cannot stop federal agents from operating inside Massachusetts. They can't stop them in public places from carrying out lawful arrests and deportation actions. And that means that the question is essentially like, well, at what point can the state step in and act? Is there any point to making kind of public statements of objection? So that's where everyone's kind of at right now.
One of the things, of course, that people are objecting to, among many, is that it seems like, in addition to immigration enforcement, there's a lot of just random roughing up, beating up, tear gassing protesters. Is there anything that the state can do just to change the surrounding actions that immigration authorities are taking above and beyond or separate from the actual immigration enforcement arrests that they're doing?
So that's a really interesting question and one that I was probing a little bit as I was reporting on this piece, which is on a fundamental level, the rights of protesters, for instance, are First Amendment issues. The state doesn't need to do anything to say that we have First Amendment protections at protests. So that can make it a little bit tricky because to basically defend an individual's constitutional rights, if an immigration agent, in the belief of the individual or in the attorney general, is overstepping and stomping on those constitutional rights, that again is kind of a reaction based response where the attorney generals of all of these states are the only ones who can bring those constitutional enforcement actions against federal officers. The difficulty, and we're going to talk about a phrase that many of you may have heard before, is that government officials and governments will very quickly claim qualified immunity for these agents, basically saying that under case law and common law for a really long time, the idea is that you can't hold government officials liable. You can't punish them in basically any way if they were acting in a way that is basically in the normal course of their jobs. So kind of defining what that means can become very difficult. And it is, again, kind of why the AGs sort of need to take a whack-a-mole approach to these individual instances, while at the same time trying to bring these lawsuits in Minnesota and across the country, saying that the surge itself and the way that it's been carried out basically trampled on states' rights and individual rights.
So, if I'm interpreting what you're saying right, then it's that there really isn't a whole lot of new policy that can be passed, that state officials are more or less waiting to see what wrongdoing might appear and to go after that and kind of, as you describe it, a whack-a-mole approach. Is that a fair description of what they actually can do?
So this is where it gets a little bit messy. That's about what the attorney general can do. The state legislature has been kind of, I hesitate to say shrugging off, but they have not been very kind of intensely active on a number of policy proposals that would basically strengthen or clarify Massachusetts law with regard to some of these kind of immigration actions. So one very significant possible change is a policy package that's known as the Safe Communities Act, and that's been filed every term for almost a decade into the Obama administration here. And that's back on the table in the Senate, at least here in Massachusetts. So in simple terms, that would prevent police and court officials from asking about immigration status as they make arrests. It would require written consent from a person who's in state custody before federal immigration officers would be allowed to interview them. And it would also strengthen some due process protections. The big change that this would possibly make is banning what's called a 287G contract. And those are agreements between local officials and federal authorities that let those local officials act as federal immigration agents. There's only one law enforcement body in Massachusetts that has that agreement, and that's the Department of Correction. But those agreements are basically proliferating across the country. The Department of Homeland Security said it now has more than 1,000 of those across the country. So this, if passed in Massachusetts, would say we cannot have those sorts of agreements anymore. So that's one potential policy proposal. Another policy proposal filed by Senator Lydia Edwards would change the way that federal immigration authorities were able to act on basically courthouse property. So state court property. They couldn't wear masks, they'd have to announce themselves, and they couldn't make an arrest or a detention on courthouse property unless they had a judicial warrant. So they would have to actually say this person is needed for some sort of criminal infraction, and we have a proper warrant to do that. So those are some of the proposals that are being floated right now. And what I heard from Senate leaders here is that there is this renewed sense of urgency. Senator Cindy Friedman, who's tasked as the point person to deal essentially with Trump policies, told me that if she had to bet on it, there will be action on this ASAP. The idea they're not waiting for a second term, at least in the Senate. That, of course, depends on buy-in from the House and also from the governor. And so far, though Maura Healey has been pretty outspoken about her disdain for ICE's actions and tactics in Massachusetts and in other places, she hasn't gone on the record or anything to say that she backs, say, the Safe Communities Act or any of the other bills at this point.
Right. And as you noted, this bill has been around for a while. Like, this isn't a new idea, but I think it has taken on some added urgency just because of the politics, frankly, because of the polling. Public opinion on these issues is changing very quickly, like at a pace that we see, relatively rarely, and usually only in response to sort of major events that everybody pays attention to. This is an event that has broken through. Like, there's just no question about that. You look at the polling and you see huge majorities saying that they've seen videos of either or both of Alex Preddy's shooting or Renee Good's shooting. You see very strong disapproval among Democrats, which is, presumably who most of the leaders that you just described are at least significantly responding to. Independents are also very squarely against both those particular incidents, but then also just kind of how ICE is comporting itself overall. Nationwide, ICE has a 36% approval rating, which is terrible. And actually, we're now to the point where more Americans than not approve of the idea of abolishing ICE, which is just an earthquake of a change since, that one is over a bit longer of a time, from 2018, 2020, 22, 24, we saw it kind of steadily change, but now we're finally to the point where more people approve of abolishing ICE than oppose it.
I think that also is kind of an interesting button on our conversation last week with Congressman Seth Moulton. He's one of the congressional delegation members who have filed bills around sort of ICE's behavior and protections. So as he mentioned, he is not saying specifically abolish ICE in kind of a very literal sense, but in a practical sense, he's called for reallocating funding that's been going toward this massive ICE expansion toward things like healthcare. You also have bills that have been put forward by Senator Ed Markey and Rep. Ayanna Pressley that would take aim at that qualified immunity thing that I was talking about earlier. The idea that if a federal immigration agent violates or is believed to violate someone's constitutional rights, that they should, in fact, be able to be held accountable for that. So unlikely that those go anywhere really in a Republican-controlled Congress, but just to note that while state options are limited, there is still some attempt at the national level, at least in Massachusetts' delegation. But I think that's kind of where we have to leave it for now. It's fast moving. Things might have changed by the time you're hearing this, but I think that's where we're at. And that brings us to our next segment, which is polling, more polling, this time on education and AI. Steve, I'm going to let you do the windup before the head exploding portion of this. Why were you asking about education and AI?
Yes, this was a poll which is now the 13th in a series for the Education Trust in Massachusetts, going all the way back to the early days of the pandemic. So we've had many polls out of parents in Massachusetts, K-12 parents specifically, and this one was done among over 1,300 parents. And as always, there's oversamples of Black, Latino, and Asian parents. This particular one was done in October and November of last year, but actually is just out this past week.
Okay, all right. So why dive into this topic specifically?
Well, I mean, part of the reason is just because AI is coming into every area of our lives so quickly. We certainly see it in the workplace. We see it whenever you open a browser or any application on your computer, and the programmers are clearly trying to figure out how to integrate a, chatbot somehow into whatever the program is. It's annoying, often, occasionally helpful, but one place that it is also coming, in addition to all the apps that we all use, is into the classroom. So when we asked in this poll how many parents knew that their kids were already using AI in the classroom, most parents said that they already are. So 59% of parents say that their children are already using AI for schoolwork, and that rises to 70% among high school parents. So that's the reason, is it's coming very quickly, and parents really haven't had enough time, I don't think, to react and process and figure it out and understand kind of how it's being used. So that's why we wanted to go out and figure out what was on parents' minds.
So I love this. And one of the things that's just sort of immediately coming to mind is the type of AI, because we've talked in the past about how, depending on how you define it, and I think about a conversation that I had on the podcast with our AI chief, basically the head of the Massachusetts AI hub, about how well AI describes any specific thing, how much of it is just kind of like hype marketing, and how much of it is something that like you can very discreetly identify. Like, is grammar correct AI? Well, if you want to market a new tool with that as AI, maybe, or we might just think about it as kind of, spell check. So were you asking about what these different types of AI are, or are we treating it as sort of this sort of amorphous blanket?
Yeah, I think parents in many ways think of it as amorphous, just because it is a relatively new technology. I think that there's not one sort of common definition that everybody thinks of. I think if you had to name the most common one, it would be a chatbot, ChatGPT or Gemini or something like that. ChatGPT being by far the most commonly used. But we did ask about like just different uses and what your child is actually using it for, and found that parents said the most common thing was checking grammar, solving math problems, brainstorming. Jen looks like her head's about to explode, since this isn't a video
No,
medium. I figure you should all know this.
triumphant. But I do, my excited face does look like my head about to explode face, because again, this is like literally exactly the same thing that I was talking about, because we've talked before about the AI summaries on Google now. So if you, for instance, put a question into Google, you are seeing AI whether or not you asked for it. So I'd be shocked if every one of these children didn't Google something at some point. So do we count that as using AI? That's why I spiral out, Steve.
Yeah, no, that's a fair question, and I think the actual answer is that probably 100% have actually used AI in that sense, or at least read an AI summary of something, even if they didn't mean to look for one. But the questions on this one, they're all printed in the presentation documents and so forth, which are on our website and EdTrust's website if you want to look at more. But the question was, to the best of your knowledge, in what ways, if at all, has your child used AI for schoolwork, either in or out of school? And when asked that way, again, it kind of escalates by grade level, but checking grammar, solving math problems, brainstorming were the most common ones. Summarizing and studying were a bit less common. But then, the other side of it was, okay, well, what does that actually do? Like, what does that help? Does that hurt? What does it help? What does it hurt? And that was what a lot of the rest of the poll was about.
So to what extent are the parents comfortable with this? How do they feel like it's impacting their kids?
Well, they think that there's a possibility that it could actually help things like digital literacy skills, researching and judging information sources. Those were two where more people thought that it could help. Even with those, there's still, sort of 20 to 30% who think that it may hurt. But then there were others where you had 40 or 50% where you thought that it could potentially hurt their children's educational experience. And those were creativity and innovation, not surprising, writing and communication, critical thinking, collaboration, and then math. Because all of these you can kind of completely bypass if you want to. If you want to come home, put your math problems in ChatGPT, you can do that. But then have you actually learned it? That's kind of the question I think that's concerning parents.
So, do we have any sense about what parents would like to see schools do about this?
Yeah, there are a few concrete things, and a lot of it has to do with policy. And to be fair, a lot of parents just don't know if their school has a policy right now, but in most cases would like to know and would like to help build it if there isn't one already. So we asked about whether schools have just regular old student data privacy policies. Most parents knew that they did and said that they did. But then when you ask about an AI academic integrity policy, only 37% said that their school did have one. And the rest of them either didn't know or just said that there isn't one already. And just a straight AI use policy, even fewer, 28% said that they knew that their school had one of those. So that was, these are all areas where there's kind of a lot that could differ about how schools use AI. And that is not even just students, that's also teachers. Like, how does the teacher use AI? Do they use it for grading? Do they use it to help build their syllabus? Do they use it for helping with tutoring? Do they use it to create worksheets? It can do all of these things. So that's another area where, nailing down the specifics, I think, are something that's on a lot of parents' minds.
And in my experience, thinking back to when I was a wee lass in my own K-12 education, schools and teachers have always sort of had to deal with how they want to restrict or define different types of academic behavior. There's often very strict no plagiarism policies, but that can also be difficult to check and measure if you have AI using kind of a predictive text vomit of a bunch of different kind of training. Steve, don't giggle at me. I'm correct.
I like predictive text vomit. I think that phrase is going to stick.
where the idea, right, is it's not as straightforward as saying, well, I can check and see if the student just grabbed Wikipedia from it. But now it's that, at least if you could tell if a student was plagiarizing from Wikipedia, you knew what Wikipedia said. You knew where they would get it from. And so the thing about the AI large language models is it becomes a lot harder to kind of figure out where this information is coming from. Plenty of them are getting better at citations. But again, does that help a student learn how to research and how to check those sources? So, the question of what are the rules in any given classroom in any given school have always been sort of a moving target as technology has evolved. So I have been very curious about how these different schools not only try to grapple with the standards and regulations around AI, but specifically what you were measuring here, which is, are they communicating it to parents either? If you're sitting there trying to help your kid with a school project and they say, no problem, my teacher says I can just plug this into ChatGPT, would you have any way to know whether or not that's true? And that just fascinates me.
Yeah, and those are very real, very practical questions that are playing out every day in schools, both in Massachusetts and really everywhere. When you ask parents that question, like, is this cheating? Do you think using AI to help a school work should be considered cheating? There's a pretty wide range of views on that too. The most common, sort of frustratingly for those seeking clarity, is sometimes. 2/3 of parents say it's sometimes cheating, whereas 19% say always, and 14% say no, it's not. So there's nuance really even there.
I really love that because again, thinking about, the way that those things are applied is what would make it cheating or not cheating. If you are working on specifically maybe a grammar test and you plug it into ChatGPT, I'm pretty sure parents would say that's clearly cheating on your grammar test. But if it's saying, well, can you refine this short answer question in a science prompt where you're not being checked on grammar, but being maybe checked on the factual content of whether or not you can explain the final stage of a plant community, then maybe that would be something where the grammar components of an AI would not be cheating. So again, I can't really blame them for being confused on that one.
Yeah, and that puts an enormous amount on the teacher too to kind of figure out exactly what it might have been used for and exactly whether or not some small bit of assistance was cheating or some slightly larger or much larger bit of assistance was or was not cheating. So, just tons of nuance there. There was one other thing that we asked about, which is what parents are comfortable with teachers doing with AI.
Yeah, that's right. Because one of the things that you mentioned, of course, is that these can be used to create academic content as much as respond to it. So using it for slides, using it for lessons plans, using it for tutoring. So what did parents think?
Yes, and here too, there was a pretty wide range of views depending on what exactly teachers were using it for. So the things that they were actually the most comfortable with were providing help to multilingual learners, which is also quite interesting because parents of multilingual learners were also the most bullish, the most comfortable with AI in education overall. So, presumably because that more in-language assistance is available at home that might be available if it's just you, the parent, who might speak little or no English, now the student has access to a resource at home that they didn't before. So parents across the board are also the most comfortable with that. Also with providing extra help to students with disabilities or individual needs, admin, curriculum design, we're starting to get a little less comfortable with these things, lesson plans a little less comfortable, and then down at the bottom we have grading and feedback. Those are the two where I think parents are least interested in having teachers kind of outsource those to a AI model.
Oh my gosh, your kid just gets a little report back, and at the bottom it just says beep boop, and you're like, okay, I guess that's where we're at now.
Except AI is always positive. That's the thing. It's like, great question. You've done it. Let me answer this great question
Beep,
you just asked.
boop, heart emoji.
Right, exactly.
Well, that is so interesting. I mean, honestly, we always, plug reading the actual study and the results, but these are so interesting. And I'm looking forward also to seeing kind of how polling on this evolves over time. So MPG, go read it. We will have the link to the actual poll in the description of this episode, so you can do your own homework. Don't just listen to me.
I'm Zainab Asma-Doyle, Research Director at the MassINC Polling Group. The MassINC Polling Group serves the region's leading foundations, political groups, government entities, and businesses. Our surveys and focus groups bring high-quality data to the toughest questions facing society today. Learn more at massincpolling.com.
And this brings us to our final segment, which this week is brought to you by our snow shoveling, possibly real, possibly fake, is it AI department here at the horse race. We'll work on the naming rights on that. Steve, what's with the unicyclers?
Yeah, we definitely have to condense that name. But we do have a large and well-equipped snow shoveling department here at the horse race. And what the story was there was actually a video that appeared of people, apparently in Somerville, unicycling while shoveling snow. And there was some debate as to whether or not this was physically possible, and perhaps this could have just been an AI creation. So the intrepid Boston Globe reporter and former horse race guest did a heroic act of service journalism and went out and found the people who were featured in this video, which turned out to be real. Apparently you can actually both ride a unicycle and snow shovel at the same time. So if you, resident of Massachusetts, listener to this here pod, are struggling with how to shovel the 30 inches of snow off your sidewalk, I would strongly suggest buying a unicycle.
This is not legal advice. Do not listen to Steve Koczela. He is not liable. He has podcast immunity if you end up injured by unicycling while trying to shovel snow. This has been your disclaimer.
Yes, definitely don't do that. Do not do that. Do not do what I just said.
So while we're ignoring Steve, it's my time to tell you that's all the time we have for today. I'm Jennifer Smith, signing off with Steve Koczela, not a legal expert. Our production and theme music is done by Charlie Koczela. You can write to us at thehorseracepodcast@gmail.com. Don't forget to give The Horse Race a review wherever you're hearing us now. Subscribe to Commonwealth Beacon's Daily Download and reach out to the MassINC polling group if you need polls or focus groups done or just have thoughts about AI. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week.